If you, sorry, bear with me a minute. If you want to ask any questions, you obviously are muted. Please ask them throughout the workshop by unmuting yourself or pressing your space bar. Ask them as we go along. There'll be some time at the end to ask questions as well and show your work if you want to share it or share any thoughts with anybody. But please do ask away, and we have, there's no silly questions at all. So please feel free to ask something, even if you think it's really obvious. Quite often it's not, and there's loads of people who want to know the answer. Anything else? Oh, you can also ask questions in the chat box. So pop it in the box below to everyone, and people do like to start up conversations in the chat box, and also Gav will ask it for me because he's just around the corner. If you've got any tech problems, you can stick it in the chat box and he can help you with that, and if you get logged out, he can log you back in. Okay, so for those of you that have not been before, you're very welcome to work along with me and sort of potter and sort of have me just going in your ear, a bit like a podcast, or you can sort of just watch what I do and have a go later. You'll get a recording, and that works really well because you can mute me, number one, and you can pause and rewatch bits that you've missed. So I will go at a speed, but don't worry if you can't catch up. So there'll be plenty of opportunity. Right, so I'll just pop down to my other camera. Oh, rusty, not doing this for a couple of weeks. I've forgotten where the button is. Okay, so I'll just take you through a few options, just to let you think about what maybe is the sort of style that you like to work through. I'm just going to start by showing you one of my little sketchbooks. Lots of you have seen this image before that are regulars. This is my Italian sketchbook. And this is a really, really quick way of adding a painted house to your sketchbook. So this is done with watercolour pencil. I've done a really simple sketch, and I've just washed a little bit of water over the pencil to agitate the line. So it's only one colour, but I would still classify this as a painted house. And it's a really simple way to, just to carry a watercolour pencil in your bag, and maybe one of those water brushes, or even just a bit of spit. Some of you will know that I'm quite happy to lick my sketchbook, so maybe that could be an additional element. If you're sat by a pond drawing these, or a fountain or the sea, dipping your finger into the water and rubbing it across the image also imbues a little bit of that place into your sketchbook page. So that could be an option to think about if you're going ultra simple. This is another simple option that's a variation of what we were doing in the drawing class, where we were doing these tonal sketches with one colour wash. And this is very similar in that I've put that skeleton down with a pencil and added the dark tones in, but I've just added a few more really basic colours, and I've not done anything flash with it. I've not done it as a house painting. I've just gestured with a bit of obvious colour. And the cherry blossom was done, this was all done in watercolour, and the cherry blossom was done with pink gouache, so that it just sort of popped out and sat in front. But this was a very quick painting to do because the drawing held it up. And so this is what we're going to be working on today, is this kind of technique. So this is just taking our drawing method a little bit further. And this is a method that I probably use most of all. I use all different types of skills and tools and methods with my sketching, but I think this was the one, when I was thinking about how to run this course, this was the one that I think is my favourite, which is laying down a skeleton of waterproof ink in some form. So that could be waterproof ink in a drawing nib, it could be a waterproof pen, it could be waterproof ink in a fountain pen. So you put down your initial sketch and then you overlay colour once the ink is dry. So you've already got a structure there. This is not traditionally how watercolour is done normally, because I'm adding in sort of very dark elements to start with and then washing over the colour. Traditional watercolourists will work from light to dark. But this is a technique which is a sketching technique, because it means you can get structure down without adding any colour. So you could sketch something and then add the colour later. So it's exactly the same technique for the ancient Ramin. So that was just drawn with a brown waterproof ink and then the colour added. And the same with these, again the same technique but all looking slightly different. These were done with a dip nib, dipping in directly into the ink, so you get a lovely wobbly line. These were done with a brush pen, but all the same principle, just using a slightly different pen to create that structure underneath the painting. So that's what we're focusing on today. Just thought I'd quickly show you some of my early experiments. And these are probably the first paintings that I'd done with using watercolour. So I'm not a watercolourist. It's all kind of made up. I've never done any workshops or courses. So I started to introduce the illustrative elements with pencils because I didn't know how to add darker bits or details or anything like that. So they're a bit more washed out than my normal. I've gone a lot brighter as I've got a bit more experience. This one was my first experiment with a little bit of colour. Sorry about the light. It's under glass, so you get a bit of a reflection. And this is very similar to what we're going to be doing today. But remember I said about the structure being done in ink on the others. The structure for this has been done with a watercolour pencil. And the same with this little one. I wanted to show you this one because of my dramatic problem with chimneys. Look, so this should both be this size. And then this one just turned into a mutant chimney. I think it was slightly bigger, but I don't think it was that big. But anyway, it's interesting to keep and collect these little things and look back, because at the time I think I thought it was really good, and then I look back and thought, what's going on there? So anyway, that's just food for thought. Right, so just a few other words now about paper and materials, because it's one of the things that I get asked about quite a lot when it comes to watercolour. So I thought it'd be really helpful just to take you through a few different papers that I use and just sort of unravelling watercolour paper really. There's 3 different types of watercolour paper. There's something called rough, which I can't show you an example of, but basically it's a very rough paper. And it shows a beautiful texture to the watercolour. So it's very nice to use. It uses lots of paint, but it's hard to draw on. So that's one end of the spectrum, is rough. The other end of the spectrum is a very smooth paper, and you might see this as noted down as HP or hot pressed. It means that the paper as it's being made has been put through hot rollers, which means that you get a very smooth finish. So this is a particularly expensive brand of paper, Saunders Waterford, because it's handmade, but there are other versions that are machine made and much cheaper. And so I would use papers like this if I was doing a best piece of work, but the machine made watercolour papers are absolutely fine for lots of nice experiments and actually unfinished pieces of work. So you've got hot pressed and you've got rough, and then in the middle is something called cold pressed. So it means that it's not as rough and it's not as smooth as the hot press. And so it's sometimes called not just to confuse things, it's called cold pressed or not. So it's not rough and it's not smooth. And cold pressed is kind of nice. So this is a machine made cold press. This is a cheaper jumbo pad. I bought it on Amazon for a workshop that I was doing where I needed lots and lots of sheets of paper. I think this is about £30 for 50 sheets, maybe less. But some cold press papers are fine for doing this sort of structured work with a pen on. They're not too rough. Sometimes they have mixed sides, so one side is rougher than the other. So I might do a demo on this today, the cold press, just so that you can see what that looks like, as this is a sort of a more affordable everyday paper. At the very cheaper end of the scale, and really good for experiments, is just some heavyweight cartridge paper. So this would fall under the category of hot pressed, really. It's very similar to the hot pressed in it's very smooth. The heavyweight means that it's kind of like card. So when you add water to it, it's not going to buckle too much. It's not going to hold flat. But for little sketches and experiments, it's really good for that sort of thing. And that's much cheaper than buying watercolour paper. So are there any questions with regard to paper at this stage? No? Okay. Right, so I'm going to take you through some techniques that I use to create these little houses, some painting techniques. And the first thing I'm going to do is just have a look and draw a few structures with some different media. So I've got a few of my favourite waterproof pens here. I've got a standard fine liner, an everyday Uniball. They're made by the Mitsubishi Pencil Company, and they're like a gel writing pen. And these Uniball ones are waterproof, so they're really good for sketching. This one is a flexible manga pen that's used, it's kind of a bit like a brush pen, and it's used for doing cartoons and sketching and stuff, and that's waterproof. That's a brown one, that's quite nice. I like to use these sailor pens that have got a bent nib. Don't know if you see the little bend, it looks like it's broken. And you get a thin and thick line. And I put waterproof ink in there. So it's got a converter in there. So you pop the pen into the ink and then you screw the converter up and it sucks it up into this reservoir, ink reservoir. And the waterproof ink that I use, again, lots of you are very familiar with this because I say it a lot, is the De Atramentis document ink. And I've got a brown one as well. I think they do come in different colours. But those are tried and tested from me as being really good as working through a fountain pen without drying up. And once they are dry on your paper, they're absolutely bulletproof when it comes to washing over colour. So this is the same. This is another sailor pen with, again, a bent nib, but just a bit less bent. So it's got a different angle. I think you can only get 2 angles. And this green one is a slightly more dramatic angle than this one. And you can obviously put non-waterproof ink in them and experiment with that. And then this is a double-ended brush pen by the modern calligraphy company, Kirsten Burke. It's called a KB Sailor pen. And I did give you, it's got a little one at that end, look, little pen. It's really good waterproof brush pen for drawing. I did give you a link to another one because this one I think is expensive and it does run out really quickly, whereas the other one I gave you a link to doesn't. And I think I've left it at my studio, the other one. So those are pretty good. I also use I use Lamy fountain pens, and this is a more expensive Pelikan fountain pen. And again, the same system as this hasn't. This has got the same reservoir system, but you screw the end to pull the ink up. This has currently got non-waterproof ink in it, but I quite often put waterproof ink in it as well. And fountain pens are lovely to sketch with. I really enjoy those. So that's the sort of pen option. Other materials that I've got that I like sketching with, that I'm going to be demoing with today, are just a little odd assortment of things that I find in my pencil box, which I quite like to experiment with. Oops. So I've got just a normal colouring pencil. This is actually oil based, so if you run water over it, it wouldn't move. A charcoal pencil. So I'm just rummaging around to see if I could find some stuff to do experiments with. This is a little Herban pen, and again, this has got non-waterproof ink in it. I like drawing with non-waterproof ink sometimes. I've got just a normal pencil, but it's quite a soft one, so it makes a nice dark line. It's 7B. And then some standard biros, great for sketching with. This just found this next to the phone, so I thought I'd give that a go. A paper, I don't think that's waterproof. The papermate's got a felt tip. I've got a water-soluble crayon, so it looks a bit like a standard wax crayon, but it's not waterproof. No, I don't know what this is. It feels like a normal drawing pencil. I'll give it a go. Derwent Drawing, Venetian Red. I thought it was quite a nice colour for house drawing. And then this is a water-soluble pencil, so when you wash the water over it, you'll agitate the line. So have a go with those. Other stuff, I've got some oil pastels, so various colours, but I'm going to be particularly using the white one today. You could alternately use a white wax crayon or a candle. The toothbrush is really useful for adding sort of texture to little bushes nearby. I've got a white Posca paint pen for adding little highlights to windows and to bricks and stuff like that. So that's those bits. There's a bit more of a conversation about materials today, isn't it? But I think it's important to go through a few of these bits because it's something that people ask me loads of questions about.
Other questions just about how you feel about cleaning through a pen.
Okay, oh, that's a really good question. So I don't know if you heard that from Gav about clogged up pens. So yes, these, because this is permanent ink, and I'm really do this quite a lot, is I sometimes don't screw the lid on, or if a pen's not used very much, then I can't, it just blocks it up, and it dries up the whole nib and all of the reservoir. The best nib cleaner is by Diamine. It's about £1.95, and what you would do is you would just suck it up with a reservoir like this, like you would do your ink. You pop it in, suck it up, and it sucks the nib cleaning solution up into that sort of barrel. And I just sort of scribble on a piece of old paper with it, and it pulls that nib cleaner down through the nib and gets it really nice and clean. And then I rinse it off with some water and rinse out the barrel. And it's like an instant fix. So I've got masses of old pens that are all clogged up, and sometimes I will pour the Diamine into a little tub and then just soak the pens in it if they're really bad. And you can then reuse it. So then from that tub or from the pen, just pour it back into the bottle and it can be reused loads. I've tried quite a lot of nib cleaners, and a lot of them are really expensive, but the Diamine, like I said, is about £1.95. It's not expensive, and you can get it from Cult Pens in the UK, but I'm sure you can get it elsewhere if you're abroad. So just a little bit about my brushes. So most of you know I really like Rosemary & Co for brushes. They do a brilliant red point vegan brush, which is synthetic. It's very cheap and really good. I generally use pointed brushes for most of my watercolour work, from sizes, a big size like this, which is a size 12. So
Can't see the top.
Oh, sorry. There we go, that's better. Thank you. So yeah, I tend to use rounded and pointed brushes for a lot of the work that I do. They range from a larger size, which is a size 12, and then the smaller the number goes, the smaller the brush size goes. I very rarely use little brushes, but they can be very useful for colouring in tiny little window panes and stuff like that. So that one is a size 2, and that one's a size 12, so you can compare those two. I don't often use a square brush, but I have seen a lot of artists use them to do tiny bricks. So maybe a very small square brush, maybe half this size, which is a size 10, could be useful, and it could be part of your style, but I thought I'd pop it in there just as something if you've got that sort of a little square brush hanging around in your art kit. And then I've got some dagger brushes here, so you can see that they are partially pointed and partially sloped, which means that you can get a bigger stroke. I'll demonstrate them in a minute. You can get a larger stroke of the paint, but you can turn the brush round and get a smaller, more detailed stroke. So they are really useful if you're wanting to limit your art supplies. So those are dagger brushes. And then these are my little travel brushes. They just fit in my pencil case. A travel dagger. And then just a standard round brush. I think this is my most used brush, actually. I would probably, if I had no other brushes, I would just use this one. I think it's probably about a size, comparing it to these, I think it's probably about a size 8. You can't add too much detail with it, and I kind of like that. There we go. Right, I'll just move those out the way. Bear with me just 1 minute. Okay, so I'm going to grab some of these materials now and just draw some simple shapes. So you might want to work along with me, because we're going to set up some experiments for our watercolour. So I'm going to try with my sailor pen, and I'm just going to draw the same shape with all of my pens, which will be a rectangle. And I'll just stick a bit of a roof line on and a little chimney, a rectangular window, and a door. I'm just going to write here what pen I used. Bear with me a minute. There's just a lady trying to get into the Zoom session, so I'll just pass this on to Gab. Okay, so that was, I've got a note that that's my sailor pen. So I'm also going to try my fine liner. So you might want to do the same. A different line, a thinner line. So if you're looking for something more subtle, perhaps a thinner pen might be what you're after. So this is really about, so I put uni pin, fine liner. This is really about finding your way. If you haven't got lots of these waterproof pens, if you've just got one you can test out, that's fine. I'm going to be showing you a few just so that you can get the idea of what some of them look like. But just having these little house blocks can be useful, because they're great in a sketchbook, just to remind yourself that you did these experiments. Okay, what else? Oh, I didn't put the, we'll put KB brush. I'll just do the other sailor pen so you've got a reference on that, and then we'll do some other ones. So this has got brown ink in. So there's my thick line that does. And then if I tip the pen up, I get a thinner line. You can also flip them over. So I'm working with it reverse. It sometimes runs out. This hasn't got a lot of ink left in.
Lucia,
yeah.
how does the sorry, it's Lou here. How does the Sailor ink pen differ from the platinum carbon one?
So the platinum carbon pen is just a very, very fine nib. I'll just see if I can find mine. So you get one thickness of line with the carbon pen, Lou. Sorry, I don't know if I've got mine on me here. Oh, here it is. So yeah, this is the platinum carbon pen, which are very hard to get hold of at the moment. They've got a really thin nib, so you'd be I'll just do the roof line for this. So you're looking at a line like that. The Sailor pen really is. If you're new to sketching and drawing houses, I would say stick with something like a fine liner or a fountain pen with waterproof ink in. The Sailor pen has got a very unpredictable line, but if you're really interested in line and mark, maybe that's something to go for. But if you're getting to grips with other art materials, then the Sailor pen is maybe something to look into at a later date. But like I said, it's very unpredictable, and I really like that. This is the little manga pen, and it kind of has the same effect as a Sailor pen, really, that you can do thick and thin lines. Which is nice because you can add bits of tone or add more pressure the thicker the line you get with this manga pen. What's it called? Mangata. And it's by Zig. So there's a few sort of waterproof pen options. I'm just going to throw some other things in the mix now that I've got. So maybe you've got other little bits of equipment on your table, and we'll see how the watercolour reacts with them. So this is my pen that's not waterproof. Whoops. I've got sketchbooks full of little boxes, either containing colour or that have been drawn or partially coloured with different materials, because I get very excited about the different reactions that you get. So this is a Herbin pen with non-water proof ink. So I'm wondering what you guys have got to experiment with. You might have watercolour pencils. The nice thing about a watercolour pencil is that the colour, because it's water soluble, when you run over it with your brush, with another colour in, the two colours will mix and mingle. So that can be a really exciting way of creating an interesting painted house. So that is water soluble pencil. And here's a water soluble crayon, so they'll be interesting to compare. I hope at the end of this, some of you are going to stay on and show me some of your results. It'd be interesting to see if anyone's trying anything different. So this is my pencil that I don't really know what it is. It's a Derwent drawing pencil, Venetian red, but I don't know if it's water soluble. I don't know if it's waterproof. It feels quite waxy. So I'll put Mystery Derwent. What else? Oh, let's just go super cheap. Biro. What's that going to do? So for those of you in the US, I think you probably call these a ballpoint pen, or maybe they're a biro to you. I'm imagining that this is waterproof. it would make sense to me that biros are waterproof, but I don't know. I've got my normal pencil, and we discussed in the drawing class about water-soluble graphite as well. So some of you might be doing some experiments with that and some different colours, or maybe you already have. So that could be interesting. 7B pencil. Maybe charcoal. So I think if you were a standard watercolourist, a lot of these things maybe you wouldn't try. It would just be about the watercolour, but this is what excites me most because I'm a bit fidgety. So charcoal. I think I've forgotten anything. Just one more, which is the pen that I found by the phone, which can quite often be interesting and surprising. So what is this? I think Papermate are made by Pentel, aren't they? There we go. Okay, so let's just test out some watercolour on this. I don't know if you can hear that. I've got the window open. That's the tractor making hay in the field next to us all day, and they've just thundered back up the road again. There we go. Right, so I think I'm going to choose out of my brushes. I might go for my standard favourite, my lovely rounded brush that's reasonably large. So we're not adding any detail. That's probably about a size 8. You could go for a size 6. You could go for a little one if you want to, really. It doesn't matter, because we're just going to wash any old colour over these and just see what happens and the impact on these inks, and just keep that as a record. So I'll just put my water there so you can see when I'm dipping into my water. So I'm just going to make up a simple mix of one colour. So I think maybe I'll go for something like an ultramarine blue. Not very housey, is it? But it's just to see how the pigment reacts to the watercolour. So I keep popping into the water so I get and into the pigment. So I'm getting like a lovely puddle. You don't want it too dry. So it should be sort of reasonably runny like that. And then just pick up a little bit onto your brush, and we'll just do a little wash over the roof line, maybe a wash on the door. Just something very simple. So I didn't really need to wash my brush off, but I did. And I'm going to try with the Sailor pen now. So a good way to test your waterproofness. Add more pigment if you need to. So we know that this is pretty bulletproof, this ink, but it's if you've bought a new pot of ink, this can be a good way to test it out. See, I'm not adding paint to all of it. I'm just sort of adding a touch. So I've got a bit of area of contrast, really. So the waterproof, we know that these are waterproof, but it's nice to have a reference point of what the colour and the blobbiness of the watercolour is in comparison to the thin or thickness of the line. So these two are an interesting combination of comparison. Sorry, always tricky with the watercolour because it reflects whilst it's wet, which is a good sign. It shows that it should be very wet. It shouldn't be dry pulling it across. and the pencil. This dabbing and not fully painting the whole structure is another one of the techniques I use, that I won't just wash paint over all of the houses. I just leave little sort of sections where the light can get in. I'm particularly interested in this one, this Herban non-waterproof pen, because I think that this could be quite messy and quite nice in the way that the ink and the watercolour might mingle, and it will give us a nice sense of imperfection. In fact, I think at the moment I'm more excited about these water-soluble ones, only because I can predict already what those waterproof ones will do. We're going to be working with waterproof ink today, but I think this is a really useful exercise. What I've found with the water solubles is that you can really agitate the line a lot and really bring the colour in. Or if you just touch the line with the colour, it just makes the line more vivid. So that can be, you know, already that's quite an interesting experiment that you could take further if you're interested in adding water-soluble, you know, water-soluble graphite and colour to your creative practice. So this was the Mystery Derwent. I don't know if it's going to do anything amazing. I don't think it's water-soluble. It's kind of nice, actually. I quite like that effect. I like the colour of it underneath. And it doesn't look like it's softening like these are. I think I've got the neighbour putting their bins out now. It's been a very noisy session so far. Sorry about that, everybody. There's the biro. So that's kind of nice. If you like this thinner, more detailed line, a biro is a really nice, cheap, waterproof option. That's staying still, staying put. And finally, the charcoal. So you can get something called compressed charcoal, which is very much like a water-soluble pencil, and it's very, it's very impactful. When you add water to it, it packs a real punch. This is normal charcoal, and it's pulling into the watercolour a little bit. I kind of like that. I like this thick line. I like being able to sort of create that dark shade underneath the roof line. So that's quite a nice finding, actually. I've not used charcoal in my work before. So that's a nice little set of experiments there. There's one more experiment that I'm going to do, which is another technique that I use loads when I'm washing paint over. I'll just see if I can show you. I don't know if it's going to show up on a camera. Might do on this one. There are some white spaces left here on the roof line, and those have just been done by popping a bit of oil pastel or wax onto the sketch before I put the painting over. So that can be a really useful technique if, like me, you get overexcited and you don't leave any white bits. It also adds texture to the structure as well. So it can be very useful if you're doing a house portrait. So if you've got something like a wax crayon or an oil pastel or something like that, let's try combining a couple of techniques. I'm just going to do a house. I've got grabbed my biro, but it could be any pen. And I'm just going to, with my oil pastel, just drag it across the roof and then do a few little dots of it to represent bricks. I'm not putting them in any particular place, it's just to add texture. I'll do a bigger stroke of it here so you can see in more detail what it looks like. But obviously, because it's white, you can't see where you've put it. So I find it incredibly exciting as well. I'm doing a sketch to have put that on there, and then I somehow sort of forget that I've done it. And then when you put the watercolour on, the water resistance of the oil pastel or wax then just sort of emerges. So you can see that you get not just the white space, but the pull of the pastel across the paper. So I'll fill all of this in just to see if we can get some little bricks through as well. It gives this lovely sort of textured effect. I'll hold that up to the camera in a minute, and we'll just, you can see it pulling away from these white areas there. It sort of repels it. You can see as well that different areas of pigment have just pulled around the oil pastel. And I just love that you get this gradation in colour. You can emphasise that by just picking up a bit more pigment and touching it into those areas. And again, that will pull away from the oil pastel. And as it dries, it will still sort of mingle with the wet. So that will be interesting to see. We'll have a little look at that in a minute. So you can just probably see the texture there if I hold it up and onto the little roof. So that's a good, and it's also can be really good for foliage as well if you're doing little bushes and leaves outside your houses. Okay, so that's your outline, that's your structure, but we want to also cover building these sort of layers of what I would call, that's your skeleton, the pen work, and I would call all the other bits the muscles and the skin and the clothes. So just pull another piece of this paper out, sorry. So for all the muscles and clothes of your building, a little bit of colour knowledge is really helpful. I've found generally with houses that there are a few set colours that are really good to have in your arsenal. And you can have a look on the references that I've sent you. I particularly love Victorian houses. They're really lovely to paint, where you've got a red brick, and usually we can't see the roof very well here. I found it hard to get a visual example for you. But usually for these Victorian houses, they have a grey slate roof. So there's already a really nice contrast in colour. The same with a white house. Again, we've got a really deep contrast in roof and house colour. Now, annoyingly for me, because I live in the Cotswolds, this is what I'm presented with quite a lot, which is a really beautiful, loads of beautiful little houses, but the tonal range between the roof and the main colour of the building is always very dull in terms of that there's no contrast. I mean, there's lovely, beautiful colours in there, but I quite often emphasise the roof a bit more as being a bit darker. I mean, this is your easiest option. So beautiful sort of French and Italian, Spanish and Portuguese houses. Lots of houses in Germany have masses of colour on them. And when you've got these coloured renders, they are, you know, a no-brainer in terms of creating a really high impact house. So I'm going to focus specifically on some of the more difficult housey colours to mix. I think that's probably more valuable, but I think some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about you can also apply to brighter coloured houses. Okay, so let's go for a sort of a terracotta-y red brick. And I'm just going to, again, if you've got a sketchbook page or a piece of paper, we're just going to mix some blobs. So have a go at experimenting along with me. just give that a wipe. So I use the sprayer to activate my watercolours. Just a little sprayer of water from Poundland. And it works much better than my very expensive one. But it's also good for cleaning your palette as well. Okay, so we're going for a nice terracotta-y red. So when I first started painting houses, I would find the most orangey orange in my paint box, and that would be, I mean, that's quite a nice colour orange actually. That would be what I'd go for. I've got a little bit more sophisticated with my colour mixing now. So I've found that burnt sienna, which is in a lot of paint boxes, and it looks like a reddy brown colour. It can also be called Venetian red. That can be very good for terracotta too, as a sort of underpainted colour, and it's got a lovely sort of pinky warmth to it. But rather than just take the colours straight from a palette, which quite often, like mine, I've sort of selected these colours, but there are some really good watercolour combinations that are available to buy as already pre-made palettes, which that might be something that you've got, in which case it's quite nice to experiment with these terracotta colours. And if you've got an orange, get a little bit of your orange and a little bit of a browny colour. So I'm not sure what colours you've got, but taking terracotta-y colours and just sort of mixing them and seeing what colour combination you get from those makes the colour more complex without having to know anything about colour theory. You're just taking similar colours to mix and mingle and make a slightly more complicated colour. So that one was the burnt sienna, and this one is something called transparent orange. And then, so it's kind of like a reverse sum, so that's the combination of those two. So that could be a nice terracotta-y colour. And looking at the colour wheel, most of you will know the two colours that make orange are red and yellow. But by experimenting with the reds and yellows in your colour palette, you will get a different range of oranges. So your red could be this burnt sienna. We could pretend that's our red and mix it with one of the yellows. Mine have gone a bit greeny, as yellows do. I've got this sort of orangey yellow here. It's like a warm yellow right down the bottom. Just there. I might just see what do they look like together? A bit yellowy. I'm not sure what this experiment will do. I don't think I've ever mixed these colours before, but it's really good with the knowledge, knowing that red and yellow make orange. Just having a play with the colour that you're trying to find. I think that is an interesting sort of more of a yellowy orange. What would happen if we mix kind of a pure orange? So down here I've got my reds. So this is alizarin crimson. So that's another common colour that's in ready-made palettes. And it's a really lovely bright sort of crimson red. Quite a cold red. What would happen if I mix that with this same warm yellow down here? What am I going to get? Oh, a really nice, quite a bright orange, but quite nice and terracotta-y. If you've got an orange that you've mixed and it's nice, but it's too bright for what you need and you need a more muted colour, look at your colour chart and then just run your finger across to the colour that's opposite orange. So we've mixed quite a bright orange. I'm going to run my finger to the opposite colour, which is blue. If if I put the tiniest touch of blue into my orange, it's going to neutralize it slightly because it's a complementary color. It works with the whole color wheel. So if you've got a red house and the red you've mixed is too red, roll your finger across and just pop a tiny bit of green into that bright red. And when I say a tiny bit, I mean a tiny bit. It will neutralize it completely if you put lots in. If you want to maintain that color, you need to just add a tiny touch. So into that bright orange, it doesn't really matter which blue. I'm just going to take a tiny bit of blue over there and drop it in. And it's just going to take the edge off of that bright orange and sort of grubby it up a little bit. So this one was the bright. And then that one with plus a bit of blue. So again, it's that sort of very nice sophisticated colour mix, and we're going to use that when we're going to be doing a bit of layering. So I'm just going to mix that slightly brighter colour up again. And just paint a little panel. It's quite bright. And then I can show you another technique in a minute. So perhaps you might like to just sort of paint a little orange panel. That will be useful for us. I am conscious that the colour that I'm seeing on my paper is slightly different to the one you're seeing on the screen. Mine is looking more muted and it's looking brighter on the screen. So just to make you aware of that. One of the other colours that is really useful for especially roofs that are grey, you don't want to use black. Grey roofs are really nice with a mixture of two of the colours we've already used, which is the burnt sienna and ultramarine. And the combination of these colours works in the same way as the neutralising of colours here, where you're using what is essentially a kind of a warm sort of orangey, where it's brown, isn't it? But it's, let's say that's still a warm colour, and you're neutralising it with a cold colour, which is the blue. So they are kind of like complementaries. So I've got a little bit of my burnt sienna there and a bit of my blue here. And by mixing them together, and I'm using more of the blue now than I had done on the, just when we were just knocking it back, you get a really nice sort of warm grey. If it's looking too brown, then just add a little bit more blue. If it's looking more blue, then add a bit more brown. Perhaps when you look at a roof, it looks more blue or more brown, and then you can sort of, you know, play with those two to get this lovely colour. So that's the colour that you get from it. So that is burnt sienna and ultramarine. Whoops, marine. I'm just going to paint that as a panel too, so that we can come back to that if necessary. So just going to grab my my oil pastel again, just put a few roofy lines there and run that colour over, and that could be really useful as a roof texture, and that's just our little test piece. So the same principle applies to other earthy colours. So you could do experiments with blue and other kind of yellowy, reddy colours. So I've got ochres and other siennas. So this is a raw sienna. This is a colour called yellow ochre. They're kind of sort of slightly dirtier, earthier colours. And when you mix any of them with any selection of your blues, you get a lovely combination of warm greys, and that can be so useful when you're painting houses and you've got darker areas or neutral areas, but you don't want to add black because you want to maintain a colour. When you combine these colours, as the pigment starts to dry, the colours start to granulate and separate, and so you get little touches of those pigments, which really, I mean, it does a lot of the work for you. So that's very useful, a very useful sort of technique to know that that colour mixing has a double hit, really, of a sophisticated colour mix and then this sort of granulation. Okay, yeah, so the brand of watercolour is a combination of Daniel Smith watercolour and Winsor & Newton Professional. So you can buy Cotman Winsor & Newton, which is student grade, which is absolutely fine. It's just slightly less pigmented. The Daniel Smith is a very high pigment colour, and so is the Winsor & Newton Professional. And I buy them in tubes. Whoops. I buy them in tubes and decant them into this ready-made palette, which is my Jello palette that you can just sort of close and seal. And you can also buy these little empty palettes here, these little empty pans, and so I buy the empty ones and then squeeze the paint into them, and just this one is stuck. I've stuck with double-sided tape, and these are just loose, and I just close the lid on those to keep them still. The Magello palette is great because you can pull this out and you've got lots of mixing space, and you can use it to put gouache or acrylic in, whatever, so it's a good palette. Okay, so the Cotswold stony kind of colours, which again still appear in not just the Cotswolds but other places, that kind of warm, a warm sort of stony colour. I sort of make a mixture of, I've got this slightly grey watercolour. I'll have to put, I can't remember what this one is called, but I'll put it in the notes that I send you tomorrow. It's a slight off-white. That's quite useful for a bath stone. If you haven't got any colour like that, or you don't really want to buy it, then you can just do a little mix of, again, making other warm greys. So got a bit of yellow there. Sort of making pinky colours, really. I've got a warm red. I'm going to make another orange. And just knock it back a tiny bit. So it's the same sort of technique as the terracotta. I'm just making, I've made an orange with slightly different colours, and then I'm just taking, I don't really know what blues I'm using, but just neutralising them a little bit to get a bit of a grey. But because it's got that bit of red in and a bit of pink in, you get a sort of a softer, pinkier stone colour. If you've got warmer, I mean, it's just a case of, really, I tend to just use primary colours apart from that brown. But I just keep mixing the primary colours until I get a kind of a muddy, muddy colour that I think is about right. I always love to bring a bit of that in, this sort of funny grey colour. It's a new discovery, and that's quite nice. It's much brighter on the screen. This is quite a pale, this to me, looking at it, is like a paler brown. All of these colours dry about 3 times lighter. So as the water evaporates, they become lighter. So it's always worth painting a little bit darker. But certainly playing with a combination of these, of a few of the primary colours in your palette, and just mixing and cancelling them out a little bit, and then watering them down so that they're really pale. What does that look like? There's a really great way of getting some of these sort of housey colours. That looks so bright on the screen. It really, it really isn't that bright. If you were looking for less brightness there, then obviously you could just add a little bit more of the blue to it to neutralize it further. But that's certainly a nice color for me for the an underpainting of a house. So let me just have a little look at other colors on here. I think those were the main house colors. So variations of grey and red. Has anybody else got any particular colours that they would like to see me mix, or is that something that you feel you, with the colour chart and using complementaries, that you feel you could have an experiment or a play with?
I like to have Payne's grey in my palette.
Oh, do you? And what do you use Payne's grey for, Anne? Do you use that for sort of dark, making really dark areas?
That, and you mix it with the ochres.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll do a few demos on the Payne's grey. So Payne's grey is a pre-mixed colour. So let me show it to you. It is a very popular colour because it is a mixture of 3 colours already pre-mixed. So that's the colour of Payne's grey. It's a beautiful kind of dark indigo. And I believe it's a mixture of burnt sienna, ultramarine and ivory black, a tiny touch of ivory black. So I'll just put a bit of water through that so you can see a paler version. I mean, it's a gorgeous colour, isn't it? Really lovely. And so Anne, you were saying you like to mix Payne's grey with the different ochres and siennas. So let's pop it. This is a lighter, this is called raw sienna. And that, again, this is something that's quite often in paint boxes. So that's what it looks like. It's kind of an earthy, muddy colour or sandy colour. You get a lovely muted colour from that. Well, that's gorgeous. Like a kind of a greeny, actually that would be a lovely colour for kind of like a slate, a greeny slate colour. So it's really worth having a play with some of these combinations and then watering them down even more. You're going to get you know, really, really subtle colour changes. That's a lovely one, Anne. I use Payne's grey or indigo to add very dark areas into windows with a tiny brush, because we can see that how dark it goes if you don't use very much water. It looks almost black. Well, that one didn't. That one did. If it's not as dark as you want and you've put colour down like that, just pick up a bit more pigment and touch it so that it becomes really black. So that is the same as the Payne's grey, but just with less water. And then remember, that's got a bit of Payne's grey in as well. So really drastic variations. If I put a little bit of water here and touch up to that, you can see that pull the colour out, look gorgeous. Okay, so one of the main techniques that I use, watercolour techniques. In fact, actually, we'll go through. There's 3 key watercolour techniques that I use when I paint my houses. So my colour mixing is basically primary colours with a few additions that I play with out of my paint box. But I use a few set watercolour techniques and they can be really useful to practice with. So I'll just put this over the other side. Sorry, those of you that are regulars will know that I have a very, very small space in which I work. And this is the only place in our house that we get an internet connection. So the mixing and moving of paper is always really tricky to fit in underneath the camera. So it's reversed, I'm afraid, the watercolour palette now. Sorry about that. Okay, so the watercolour techniques that I use for for painting houses are, first of all, the sky technique, which is a wet in wet technique. So I've got clean water on my brush and I just wash over a bit of sky like that. So it's you can't see it, it's just damp paper. And then I pick up cerulean blue or like a cobalt blue, but there'll be one of these in your paint palette. And I just sort of touch into that water very gently with my brush. And you can see that you don't move it around too much, but the areas that you don't touch become kind of clouds. And if you don't move it too much, gradually the water will pull the pigment in, so you get a lovely soft finish with wet in wet. The other technique I use is dropping in colour. So we've done this before in blended botanicals. So for instance, if I was, let's just use this colour that's in my palette. If I was painting a house this colour, whilst it's still wet, I would just pick up maybe another colour that I can see in the house. So it could be a sort of a stone colour. So say I could see this sort of muted warmth in. I would just sort of touch that colour in whilst it's wet. So we did this one, for those of you that have done the blended botanicals, we had two colours and we just experimented with touching one wet colour into another. So that's a really useful technique. We've already done the third technique, which was a resist, which is adding a bit of pastel underneath. And the final technique, which is my absolute key technique, is something called glazing, which is just adding layers of watercolour on top of already dry watercolour. So this is where I think you get a real punch of colour, because if you've laid a very pale watercolour wash, and loads of you, I know, because everybody does this, when you paint with watercolour, you do your initial painting and then the watercolour dries and it then starts, it looks quite bright when you put it on and then it starts to look a bit insipid once it's dried. To know that you can go back over that and reinvigorate it is quite liberating, because you can add another layer of colour. So if these were the surface of a house, putting another layer of colour on top is a bit like having two different colour pieces of acetate over each other, that they're going to sort of really affect each other and have a real impact. So let's go back to this orange again. So whatever colour you were using, just use the same colour again, but make it slightly stronger or add a bit more muting to it. So in fact, I'll go back to my original location and then it's not quite as confusing with my colour mixing. So let's remember back to this orange. That was this yellow, wasn't it? And this red. And then I think I muted it a little bit. So I'm mixing up the same colour again, but I'm making a stronger mix, so it's less watery, more punchy. In fact, for you, it's really punchy on, on the screen, double punch. I'm going to take a little bit of the blue again and bring that into a little bit of it there, look, and create that darker colour. So now I've got the same colour again but stronger and a slightly darker colour. So by adding a bit of texture on top of this. So that could be blocks or bricks. You're adding one extra layer of colour. If your original colour wasn't all that, you can add other little layers over it. So this idea of glazing is incredibly important, because you could, with your bone structure of your drawing, you could slosh paint all over the place. The structure would hold it still. It wouldn't matter if you went over the lines, and if it was looking a bit washed out, you could then go in with this additional paint layer, adding pattern and colour and texture. So the reason I'm showing you this is because I'm going to do a little demo now of how I would paint a very simple house. I'm not going to do a complex drawing. I'm just going to paint a simple house, but I'm going to employ lots of these techniques. And I'm going to add a few more in that those of you that come regularly will be familiar with, because on top of all of this, once I've done this painting stage, I then like to add loads of little details with pencils and white Posca pens and stuff like that. So if you were going to be doing a little bit of homework, I think one of the best things to do would be to experiment with your colour mixing. And then once you've mixed that colour, allow it to dry, and then mix the same version of it but stronger with a little bit of the complementary, and test out putting some of these little colours on top of each other and see what combinations you get. That's great homework. You could also test out other colours that are in your palette and see what they do and how they mix, and then try out some of your wet and wet techniques and then dropping in colour. I'm going to be showing you all of this again, but you've got that as a reference. Okay, right. So we'll clear down the decks again. Bear with me, everybody. Oh dear. Just put my name down for a new studio, which hopefully has internet access, so I can have all my stuff around me, all my mess. I will miss my little cupboard under the stairs if I did that, my little cubby hole. It is very nice and warm in the winter because I've got the radiator by my legs. Anyway, right. So I'm going to do a very, very simple house illustration with some of the additional elements that houses normally have. And I'll show you how I do each of the, actually, let's do it with this manga pen, because I think that shows up quite well. And then I'll sort of show you how I do each of the different elements. So we'll do a simple house shape again. Just thinking I could sort of do a little bit of this little house here, this little Victorian house. I'll pretend that I can see the roof a bit more. They've got a kind of a nice little cobbledy effect under the little sort of brick effect under the roof line. So I'm going to do that. Bring in that window. So a window sill. So you could, if you don't want to do a detailed drawing, you could just do a version of this, literally primary school style with, 3 little windows and a door. Just very quickly. So that goes to about there. So I do find it really difficult to talk and draw at the same time, so I hope it's not too boring to watch. Like that. Well, the window's a bit low, but will do. Don't want to add too much detail because I want to add some of it a bit later. I'm going to pretend that this, oh, let's just put the chimney on. And aerial. I'm just going to pretend that there's a bush here, just so I can demonstrate a little bit of foliage painting for you. And we'll pretend that there's a little sort of bushy tree there too. Looks like that. It's a letterbox there. I'm not adding too many details. And if I was drawing this as a commission or as a piece, I'd just be taking a bit longer over where I'm putting everything, but probably not too long. It depends how much experience you've got, and you might want to practice your house drawing. I think I do want to get those bits in because they're pale. Okay. So I think that's about all. Now there's a couple of options at this stage if I was doing a house painting. Option number one, and this is the easy option, is where, as we did with the drawing, where you've got dark areas here, you could, with your pen, your waterproof pen, is just colour in those dark areas. The second option is to paint them or to use a pencil at a slightly later stage. So I would do them all the same. So whatever method I chose, if I was going to colour them in with my pen or I was going to paint them, they would probably all be the same. So, but I'm going to, just to give you something to compare and contrast, I'm going to just colour in one of them with the pen. And then you can decide which you like. It might be the other dark areas of the house. So can you see these little dots all along here are very dark? Some of the roof lines are dark. This edge under the bay window, there's some dark areas down here. You might want to add those areas in with your pen. And again, if you're doing quicker house sketching, to put all of these dark bits in with a waterproof pen is the 100% easiest option for getting a really impactful skeleton, basically, that we can throw anything at. So like I said, I'm going to probably add more dark areas in than I normally would, because I think it's going to be really useful to have that structure. And this is how I used to do it. I used to add much more stuff with a darker pen so that I had that bone structure. In theory, you could then paint it any colour you like. It looks particularly good if you've got these little dark spots under the roof. To add those in with your pen. And again, we're doing exactly as we were when we were doing the pencil drawing in the drawing houses session, where you squint your eyes and kind of look through your eyelashes, and you can really pick out those dark spots. And remember that they act like magnets for the eye. So wherever there is a dark shadowed area, getting that in can be really useful. I also, when I've got my pen, I quite often add a few very light little building structures in, so a bit of the architecture. And it basically, this, you're creating your colouring page. So put in as much information as you feel you need. I might add a little bit of roof texture, just to suggest a tile, but we can always go in afterwards. The good thing to know is that because with illustration you work in layers, that you can always just keep adding more stuff to it. So now this is the key bit. Once you've, oh, hang on, I better just put a little bit of my resist in. So if you've got white window shapes, you can use your oil pastel to block those out. That can be exciting. If you've got little white highlights on bricks or any other little bits that you feel need texture, the white oil pastel can be useful. Looking at it, I think I might just use it to add a bit of texture to the bricks. So I'm kind of making little bricks. I might just sort of stick a few little bits in that little bush and a few longer strokes in the roof, but not too much. And now you can't remember where you put it because you can't see it, but it'll do its thing. Oh, I might just sort of put a bit on the pavement too, because that's a bit textured, isn't it? So I'm just going to grab my clean water. It's just here. So it's just above the page. You can see the corner of the pot there. If I clean this off. Now, my very top tip for you is this, which is to not worry about painting this very well at all, and just basically do a bit of a wash all over most of it. So let's wet that sky area. Remember, we used this technique before. So it's a bit damp. And wherever that water is, it's going to sort of take to the paint really nicely. I'm going to mix up a few colours while that's still damp. So mix up my blue. So I think this is a really lovely sky colour. This is cobalt blue, and it's very popular. You don't want your sky too blue, so get a bit more water in there. And I'm just going to stick that. I'm just touching my brush onto that water and it's pulling off the blue. So I'm not doing any work. Got the red brick, so let's mix up that quickly. So that was that colour. Actually, I might go for my burnt sienna and my transparent orange. Whilst this is still wet, I'm not going to worry too much if the paint mixes. Can you see that this is pulling into the sky? Just glancing at my picture so that I don't paint over some of the paler bits. But I'm not doing a very, what I would call a good painting, a detailed painting. I'm picking up some of that other colour actually. So just dipping it into the colour again and dropping in a bit more colour as I'm going along. pretty undetailed painting so far. Just washing my brush and putting a little bit of water in. You can see it's just quite blobby, and that's starting to go into the sky. Fine by me. I don't mind. Making that grey up very quickly. So that was the burnt sienna and the ultramarine blue. A bit more blue. Want it to go greyish. Stick that on. So that's kind of going into the sky now as well, and the house. It's going everywhere. So I'm thinking of this as my underpainting. It's not my finished painting. It's just, I'm just getting colour down. I've run out of space to make my green up. We didn't cover greens, did we? But that's your basic colour mixing again. So that is a bit of yellow and a bit of blue. So maybe a few green experiments if you've got some foliage. So you could try all your yellows and all your blues and see what you get. So I've got cobalt blue and Hansa yellow. I'll just stick a bit of that into the bush. There, it's all quite light. And it's going to stay, it's going to get lighter. So we're going to definitely need to add another layer of paint to it, definitely. I forgot to do this gatepost. And there was a bit of grey down there, wasn't there? So we use a bit of the roof colour. So that was the same. And then I'll just sort of sweep a bit of my brush over there for the road. Just a gesture, just to tell the viewer that that's, it's not floating, it's not a floating house. We just stick a bit of green in that because that was going to be some sort of little bay tree that we made up, wasn't it? Oh, I better put some of that grey onto the roof of that. Nice blue door. I'm not going to do anything with the door yet. Oh no, I will. So just that blue again. That would be nice, wouldn't it? It kind of links all these colours together. That cobalt blue for the sky becomes the door. Bear in mind, though, that if the maybe if the building was, there was lots of green foliage around, or it was very pale, you could just change the colour of the door, which I quite often do, unless I'm doing a commission for somebody. But the door can be a very useful device for as a focal point. So if everything's quite pale and you have a bright red door, that takes you on a journey into that house. So incredibly useful. This is all drying quite nicely now. So I'll just show you how I paint the windows whilst I wait for this to dry. So I need my little brush. So I've got a size 2 brush there. And I kind of mix up. So if I was going to do, like I said, a lot of the time I would just use this method of already having a blacked in window. I would probably use a variety of different colours for the windows, as long as they're reasonably darkish. So Anne, you like the Payne's grey, I like that too. And I also like this is an indigo. But certainly Payne's grey, indigo, you can even use a black if you want to. A lot of the watercolour blacks aren't pure blacks. So that could be useful for a window, but maybe that could be another one of your experiments, is just to sort of play around. I'd like to make a nice dark here. So again, I was playing with those similar sort of colours, these blues and that lovely burnt sienna to make a nice darker colour. And with my little brush, just colouring in that. If you ever, I think I've got too much water on here. So if you ever have too much water and it's kind of blobbed, you just dry your brush off onto a bit of kitchen roll, and whilst it's dry, then touch the colour, it will suck that colour back up again. So that's really useful if you've gone a bit overboard and you've got a big puddle. Happens a lot. Going back in with my puddly paint, using it sometimes, you know, directly from the palette with a damp brush, you're going to get a really strong pigmented colour. I've just gone puddly again. This is very difficult with the little brush. I think it sort of puddles more. I'll just suck a bit of that up. But it's nice to know that you can control this amount of water, because that's the absolute key with watercolour. If you go in and your colour is a bit, your dark is a bit pale, and you want to go a bit darker, you just drop in a bit more colour, like we did when I was showing you the dropping in technique for bricks. I kind of like it if the windows, if you paint them, if they sort of dry slightly different hues and different tones. So I'm just picking up a bit more intense colour there. So if you feel if it's still got a sheen on it, it's wet enough just to touch it with more colour and it will pull it in. If it hasn't got a sheen on it, then it's going to be dry and you'll just get a blob on the top. So that adding of colour, I think you can see it does add quite a nice depth to the window. And I haven't painted it really carefully. I've got a problem in I'm not particularly careful, but then our illustrative styles really are a product of our characteristics. So however you are, that's the right way to be, and your art will reflect that. So normally, if I wasn't teaching a class, I would probably wait for all of that to dry. So if you're doing this via the video or you're at home, I would suggest at this stage, if it's still looking shiny, then wait till it's completely dry. And we would call that our first glaze. But because we're timed, I'm going to go in and hopefully it's not going to mix too much. I'm going to go in sort of slightly drier areas with my second glaze, just so that I can get all of this in. So what I want to add now is just a little bit more detail. So this first stage, you could see I was just quite messy and it was really expressive, and I wasn't worried about all of these paints mixing and mingling. With this second glaze, I'm going to really tighten up a little bit. So I'm going to be a bit more careful, not much, just a little bit, and pull in, you know, all the colours a little bit more. I think I'm going to carry on using this bigger brush, but you might feel that as you're getting tighter and tighter and tighter, you might want to make use a smaller and smaller brush, so or a more pointed brush. So I might go in with my foliage and with a bit slightly more smaller brush. We'll see. Okay, well, I can see that the bush is pretty dry, so I'm just going to mix up another green, and just because you've done your experiments, you will know a few greens that work in your palette. So I'm trying now a darker blue and the same yellow. So I use this Hansi yellow, which is like a lovely cool yellow. You'll have one like this in your paint box. So the first green was that one, and cobalt blue. And this next one, I'm using the same yellow, so it ties in, but just trying a different blue. This ultramarine I've already used, so it's going to gel quite nicely. But I think because that's a darker blue, maybe I would get a darker green. If it's looking too greeny, you can use the colour theory method again. So remember, if you've got a really bright green, just add a tiny touch of red to it and it will knock it back a little bit and look more neutral. So we could try that with our green. So we'll try this alizarin crimson red, because again, that's one that you'll have. So that's just there. I don't want very much of it because I don't want to neutralize it for it to go like a grey. Just want a tiny touch. Actually, that was probably a bit too much. Yeah, it was a little bit. Got a bit excited. So I'll just add a bit more of the two colours that we started with. It's looking a bit less bright now. So I've got my lighter colour. So we could think the sun was hitting these bits. So all the bits that are closer to the house, I'm just going to add a bit more texture. It's pulling into the house. At this stage, you would have let it dried, unlike me. So you should get more of a crisp line. You can see that adding that darker glaze is really adding a bit of dimension to the illustration and a bit more depth now, starting to get tighter. One of the other little foliage techniques I use, and I'm not very big on any sort of techniques, they're all sort of a bit made up really. With a smaller pointed brush, I use the tip of the brush to make sort of marks that are foliagey, leaf-like. That can be a really good finishing detail. Again, once your work is dry, to add just touches of texture. If you want to go even darker in this little bush, whilst it's still wet, remember about the dropping in colour. A little bit more of that blue to make an even darker green. So same colours, just more pigment, a bit more blue. Sorry, I messed that colour mix up. So I'm using all the same colours. I'm just this is the story of my watercolour life, is constantly muddling up the colours and then having to sort of remix them. So I've gone even darker with my green there, just touch at the base of that bush and just pull in that colour. And you can see that we've kind of got 3 levels of colour going on now. Just add a bit more underneath this little potential bay tree. You can go over the lines. That's fine. It doesn't really matter what colour your underneath green is made out of and what colour your on top of green is made out of. Just as long as the one that you add on top of it, the second glaze, is got less water in it, it will be a stronger colour, so it will add that depth. I think you have to be brave and add a strong colour. So I'm going to use that same technique now all over the house, using the same colour, but just making a stronger version of it. So it might be that you can recycle what you've already got and then just add a bit more. Sorry, it's that one. Add a bit more. So because I get muddled up with what the colours I've used, and I add in different ones, maybe that sort of adds to the effect. So I've got my roof colour here, and I'm just being a bit more careful with my painting and just adding painterly strokes to give a bit of tile detail. You might add some little downward strokes that will kind of blend in with some of the wet, so it might not show up and you might have to go over it. Now for the red. Let's clean this off. So I actually think that this house needs a bit more detail painting on. All of these stages, you could, once you've done that first glaze, you could then just go in with coloured pencil and add the details, just having an underpainting. That would be a much easier option than this secondary painting system. But because this is a painted house workshop, this is the technique that I tend to use, is this double glazing system. So I'm just going to make up that lovely red again. Red, orange. And looking at this picture, there's also a kind of a nice, just pick up the paper. There are sort of little hints of like a warm yellowy kind of colour, I think, and along the top of the wall and a little bit here. I might just pop a little bit of that in the second glaze, and I don't really know, so maybe I use one of these sort of muddier yellows. So I think this is probably a yellow ochre, and again another popular colour in a palette. So I'm not going to mix that, I'm just going to use that straight from the palette. There's a line that goes along there, a bit in there, add a bit there. So I'm going to use this darker colour now. I don't know if I've mixed it quite dark enough. That, so it was the transparent orange and a bit of burnt sienna. I might tiny touch of blue to neutralize it. And then I'm just pressing my brush, using the brush to make the little brick marks, really. I'm sort of looking at the architecture, because quite often there are additional little bricks that go around the edges of the windows. I'm sure if we've got any architects on this call, you'll tell me there's a proper name for it all. I don't know. But we are not structural engineers or architects in here, even if you actually are one. When we're wearing the illustrator's hat, this house doesn't need to stand up actually as a house, just as an illustration. Definitely add a few on the chimney. Might add a little bit of a layer on that door. Just to pop that blue back in, to give it a little bit of a just a bit of depth there. I wonder whether these little blocks that are under the roof, so you can see it's just a case of looking and deciding what you want to add at this stage with this next glazing there, because you could, like I said, be doing all of this with a coloured pencil and you get a less of a watercolour-y effect, but you got more control. So that pretty much for me would be about the extent of the watercolour work that I would do. So there's another layer on the road, look, just to give that bit of texture, same colour, just going in a different direction. You can keep fiddling, this is the trouble, and then you lose the vitality of the paint and the underpainting. But that would be pretty much me done with the watercolour stage. I've got that structure underneath. Any bits that have gone over the edge, it doesn't matter because the house holds it in place, the skeleton as it were. And I'm going to go back in now with pencil. So what have we got? We've only got a few minutes left. But I think the sort of finishing stages, ideally at this stage, I would like this all to then dry again. So again, if you're re-watching this with the video, let this stage dry completely. So I've got a variety of different pencils that I like to go over this with, adding a few more details. I've got watercolour pencils that are soluble, and I've got my favourites that a lot of you know, which are Prismacolor pencils, which are oil-based. The good thing is if you used watercolour pencils on this to add detail, that if you thought the details looked a bit harsh, so say we added a bit of brickwork here, and you felt that it was too strong, you could mute it slightly by just muzzying up the edges with your brush. But if you used a non-water soluble pencil, then it's pretty much solid, but I quite like the intensity of non-watercolour pencils. So like I said, I would wait till that dries completely, and then I'd go in and I'd add things like texture to the little bush and any foliage that you've got, and texture to and more detail to the house. We started light with our first stage of colour, and then we went a little bit darker with the glaze number 2. If you're adding pencil detail, you need to go one stage darker still. So you're looking at sort of 3 levels of tone, from light to medium to darker in colour. So that was my light green, that was my middle green, and then the pencil I'm going to use as my dark green. Because we haven't got the bush reference, most of the time you can kind of predict with something like this where the dark areas will be. And then nearly always the bit that's furthest away from the sun. So you imagine the sun is coming in here, and this little bush is tucked in against the side of the house. So this area here is going to be really dark. So you could use a pencil to pull in those sort of areas that have bled too much with the wet paint. It's not going to work brilliantly because my paper is really wet. You can also use it to add, I'll just go a bit closer so you can see little sort of leaf shapes and texture and detail like that. So I could do with that being a bit drier really. Whatever colours you've got, if you think that they are, you can colour in the leaves to, if you want to, or just add them as texture. So that can be really useful. Sometimes I even finish off like a half a brush stroke with a pencil mark, or add in a few more. If you've got lines that are straight, like say I could see the stem of this tree and a pot, and I was worried about painting it, then using the pencil, so I think the stem of this tree would actually be behind, but you could sort of draw in those little elements if you didn't feel confident about doing it with a brush. Colour them in. There are lots of areas that just need a little bit of titillating and more detail. So I like to add detail to the door. So you could just bring in those dark spots there. And then there's quite a few nice little patterns on this. These little sort of structures underneath the window. So actually I might do them on there above the door. I use my pencils to bring in those little designs but that again, I couldn't do, I couldn't get that level of detail with my brush unless I used a really tiny brush. I just don't like a lot of detail, really. I'm going to use this to go under and define that shape and pattern under there. This is quite a good house to have a practice on, actually, because you've got a bit of, it's quite a simple house, but there's quite a lot of nice architectural detail that's good to play with. Pencils are really good to add more texture to the roof. And if you've got path or paving, if you hold your pencil on the side, like this, we did this in the Wild and Reckless sketching, we were sketching like this, but if you just drag it, you get at the side of the pencil, just putting a bit of texture on there. You can also use this technique with just to draw little bushes and things like that. If you've got like a little topiary garden outside, it can look really lovely, just done with the side of a pencil. So we could just sort of pop a bush in there. And you pick up the texture of the paper, which is kind of nice. I'm not worried if it doesn't look exactly, oh dear, I pressed so hard on these poor pencils, that's why they're so little. You add a bit more texture in if you like, combining pencil techniques. So this last stage that I've not left much time for really is the stage that I potter about with for ages, because I really like adding these little details. I like to use a combination of, so again, I've got my one stage darker-ish of the colour of the house. By drawing some of these blockwork in, colouring a few of them, not all of them, that helps to give you a bit of a texture. And I guess the amount of detail you put in really is up to you, because you could just go to town now on pottering away with this. How tight or how loose is completely up to you. But don't worry too much if it's not exactly like the image. I think that's the key, really, that there's a lot of artistic license. I think I've missed this blue that goes and by the door. I think it would look really nice if I was sort of painting it again. I think, well, I might just add a bit of blue to there. I'm buying a bit of time faffing around because I want to show you how to add a shadow, but I can't do it until it's completely dry. So I'm just going to keep pottering away with my colour. So maybe at this stage, if anyone's got any questions that they want to ask, while I wait for the rest of the paint to dry, please feel free. If there's anything that I've left out, I am really conscious that I have rushed through quite a lot of very complicated processes, but I hope that with the video that you can really have fun playing with some of the techniques and some of the colour blends, because I think that's the key, really. It's finding what your palette will do.
There's a question about oil pastels sticking to the brush when you paint over oil pastels.
So I don't know if you heard, Gav, there was a question about oil pastels sticking to the brush. It might be that it's your oil pastel, or that maybe it's gone on a bit too thick. This is a posh oil pastel, but I have got lots of cheap ones and I've not had a problem with them sticking to the brush. It maybe try not pressing very hard. So I am just touching the paper with the oil pastel. if it is a massive problem, then you could try using wax crayon or a wax candle instead, which doesn't, you know, it's much greasier, so it doesn't stick.
Usha, you can try using a Chinograph pencil.
Have you had much of, because I've never had any impact with a Chinograph pencil before, Margaret.
Only that you can sharpen them.
Oh yeah, of course.
The problem with wax candles is unless you've got a very fine one or a sharp edge, you can't get fine lines with it. But
no, that's true.
I take your point.
Yeah, I guess because a lot of my work is loose, I'm very rarely looking for that. You know, I like the fact that it's quite out of control with the larger size pastel, and you know, it frees up the drawing a lot.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that. I've been conscious with my pencil drawings that I've been getting too precious with them.
Yeah.
Tonight's been very good for me to just free up a little bit more.
Yeah, it's nice. And watercolor can be really freeing if you really let it do its thing. But most definitely, because of this glazing system, that underneath layer can be so free, and you can tighten up then as much as you want to, but you've got a freedom there. With your pencils, if you feel like your windows aren't dark enough, you can go in and darken them a little bit. Don't darken all of them. Have kind of a variation. That could be really interesting. Other little finishing details are you could, with these white Posca pens or with a little bit of white gouache or a white pencil, you could just add a few white lines to your window. Here's a close-up. Oops, no, that was just my focus button that I've put out of focus now. Oh dear, it's not doing a close-up. Oh, there we go. So yeah, you could just add little window reflections in with a white pen or pencil. That looks quite effective. You could bring in some of those details with a white pen, or if you've got some bits that you've gone a bit dark with, just clasp those sort of last little bits of light and bring them back in with a white pen. Mine's not working very well. You could bring in little highlights into the roof as well with your white pen. That can be really useful. Right, now I sort of think that this is dry enough just to show you just the sort of finishing touches, really. I'll just going to, now this isn't part of the workshop, don't do this everybody, but I'm just going to remove this little brick just so that I can show you the sort of shadowing so it doesn't blend. The idea, like I said, is that it's completely dry now, so don't do this until it's dry. So you can see, particularly under this on this house, even though this isn't the one we've been drawing, and we did this during the drawing workshop, is that we added this sort of dark shadow just under the roof line. This is quite dramatic on this house. You can't see it so much on here. You can see a little shadow under the window. But again, with it, that idea in mind that most of the time a shadow is being cast by roof lines and the edges of windows and the tops of porches and bay windows and stuff like that. I always like to add a little wash over the shadow line because I think it adds a really nice depth to an illustration. So my main shadow colour is just ultramarine blue. Let's just whiz back up again in a minute because we've gone a bit close. So there's my ultramarine blue again. So the blue that is occurring in this picture a lot. It's quite a limited palette. It's quite nice not to use all of the paints in your palette, but just reduce them slightly. And keep to a few colours that you know you like, and then that becomes a bit like your signature of your illustrations. So I'm not going really dark. You know, like we were doing for the windows, this is quite light. And I'm literally just going to run my brush under the window, under the roof line. The same with the windows, under the windowsill, under this little bay window edge. Should I go closer? So you can see it's not really bright. You almost couldn't see it. There were little dark panels in the wall, and then this bit there was slightly darker. But again, there's a little edge there where that top of that gatepost would fall under. I might just pop a bit under here too, because they were overlapping that little detail. I think we did this in the drawing class, didn't we? Just adding that bit of shadow. If you want a bit more shadow in the foliage, you could just add that with blue. That's your shadow colour. Anyway, where there's a shadow, just paint that shadow as essentially your third glaze. We did glaze 1, messy glaze. Glaze 2, more detailed glaze, and you could look at this shadow as your third glaze. Anything that just needed a little bit of darkening, this could be your third glaze. You could even sort of bring a little bit into your road there. Where there's areas, like if you had a little extension on here, sometimes a little side panel of a house looks really dark. You could just paint the whole of that over, paint it all at the same time like we've done, but instead of just doing a little shadow edge, you paint all of it over with a glaze of ultramarine, and that really looks effective. You can add your little bricks in with the blue as well if you want some darker brickwork. So that is one way that you can do shadows. My top secret tip though, I'll have to do this on my demo, wherever that went. And this is a great little sort of sketchbooker's friend tip if you're out and about, is you can get these Tombow pens. Sorry, that's upside down. Now this is an N75, so it's like a pale grey, and they've got lots of versions of pale grey, and you could, instead of putting that blue over, you can just sweep over a grey, so it's not showing up very well on the screen. Depends what colour you're running it over, but that's really good for creating a little shadow under your windows, and it's just a brush pen. I've got a selection of these in different colours, a few blues and a few greys, but just a grey would, in fact, you probably could do it slightly darker. So if there's a slightly darker shade than N75, I have one in my pencil case. What's that one? That's a purpley one, N60. Well, that's quite a nice shadow colour lit. So just a really quick sketchbooker's cheat is you can see how that's created another glaze of colour on top of the watercolour. Really nice. You can use these brush pens like watercolour as well, so you can just add water to them and they mix. So that's Tombow. Worth buying one. That's a really nice colour actually, N60, a nice shadow colour. Worth buying one and just having a little experiment with and see if you like it. 553, this is a purple, another nice shadow colour.
The darker grey is N45.
N45.
I've just found one in my drawer, but that's quite dark.
N45, okay, worth having a look at on the net, darker grey. So that is my top little experimental tip with the Tombow. And in fact, I think I probably have used this on this, used Tombow on this sketch. I'll do a little layer for you so you can see just a little panel underneath. It's really subtle. Let's go a bit close. It's a bit too subtle. Can you see the overlay of colour there? It's hard to go wrong actually, but really quite nice. Add a bit in the wall under here, a bit in the pavement. That's created actually a lovely shadow that looks like it's coming out from the bush. So,
which number is it?
so that one is
Yes.
553.
Thank you.
That's a really lovely one actually, because it's kind of got a lavendery, like a slightly purpley grey, like summer shadows. That's a nice one. Just looking in my pencil case to see if I've got any others. No, just sort of pinks and greens and things like that. But yeah, they're quite expensive if you buy a box of them. You can get a box for about 40 quid that's got lots of pastel colours, but I have found that I just don't use very many of the colours. So maybe worth buying a few sort of shadow colours and then adding per pen rather than buying a pack of them. Okay, so is that all right for everybody? I feel like I've bombarded you with with information tonight. I feel exhausted and definitely have to go for a lie down. Let me just pop up into the main chat. Hi everyone, I'm back again. Okay, so was that all right for you all? Are there any questions? Have you fallen asleep?
Joking.
Do you need a gym?
Fall asleep.
No, I just said that was my first workshop and it was brilliant. I'm really excited to go and explore lots of ideas. So thank you. Thanks a lot.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Oh, good. It's always very difficult, as many of you know from all of our Zoom experience now, we're Zoom pros, aren't we? That it's from a teaching point of view, it's really difficult to pick up on a class vibe like you would do if you were teaching in a normal class, a live class. Not that you're not normal, I think you are. Well, but it's very difficult to pick up on whether lots of people are feeling confused or whether you just actually are really into what you're doing and you're all kind of busy experimenting. So I hope that you were all quiet because you were, you know, consuming them
furiously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like record-breaking painting, wasn't it? So for those of you that need to go now, we've reached our time limit, but for those that have not been before, anybody that wants to hang on and show their work or hang on and just see other people's work, you don't have to show your work. I promise that's absolutely fine, because a lot of us do feel a bit nervous about sharing and they've got to build up some creative courage. That's absolutely fine. But for those of you that would like to see or share work, please stay on the call. For those of you that need to go and have a lie down, it's nice to see you, and I'll see you again. See you again soon, hopefully. I've not scared you away.
No,
if you like to share work, just sort of hold it up in the corner of your screen, just so I know that you're a happy sharer. And then I'll share. So we've got Margaret. Oh, I've gone like a double spotlight. Let me remove my spotlight. There we go.
Oh, holding my hand over.
Margaret, that's the tiniest little house in the world.
Yes, but I did it while you were working. So, I mean, that's quite an achievement. But yeah. I thought you might also like to see these little
they're lovely.
Scribbles, trying out the different pens and so on. But this, I found a charcoal sketching pencil, this one, which I rather like.
That's really nice. So was that a Derwent one, like the one I was using?
Oh, like I've had it decades.
So none of us will be able to get it.
So old, you probably won't be able to find. It goes back to my working days in Manchester. So who knows where that came from?
Okay, well, by the looks of the lettering,
it's old.
By the looks of the lettering, it might be one of these. So I'm just checking that I'm on a spotlight now. Spotlight.
Yeah,
and that one is a Derwent sketching.
It doesn't say it's Derwent anywhere on it. It's just a charcoal sketching, very old-fashioned fancy lettering, which I loved.
Oh, nice.
Probably bought it because I like the lettering as much as anything else on it.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, no, I know. Well, yes, judging the book by its cover.
Yeah, but I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. And where did the 2 hours go?
I know. Have you got to go, Stephen Page? Is it Jilly?
Yeah.
Nice to see you, Jilly. Bye. Anyone else like to share their work? Just hold it up. Gloria. Please spotlight. Oh, hey, hi, Gloria.
Hi, I'm new here,
Hello.
and I didn't follow the brief at all, but I was just having fun making my own thing, playing with the little boxes, the little houses.
Oh, that's amazing. They look incredible. And actually, like you've done, it doesn't really matter if you're not following it, other than you're picking up just some loads of little techniques that you can apply in your own work, the different glazing, all the different levels of tone, which I can see that you've done, and you've created lovely texture on your cottages.
A little whimsical. You know which one I loved? I love the gouache on top. For the flowers. I mean, that was like why I didn't think of that before. Like, just put gouache.
Yeah, that's great for creating that level of depth as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's really
I
lovely.
love that. So it was a lot of fun, and it was very relaxing.
Oh, was it really?
Love the class.
That's brilliant, because I'm like the swan with the legs panicking underneath.
I look forward to the next one. I'm hoping the next one does a little bit more embellishing of the sketchbook, because that's where I kind of
love doing.
Yeah, I need help with that.
No problem. Okay, thanks, Gloria. Nice to see you. Okay, back to gallery. Anyone else like to share? Just hold up your little bit of paper. We've got Christine. Hi, Christine. Hello. Hello. I love your house.
Oh, we've got two Christines.
Oh, sorry. Hang on a minute. Hi, Christine. Sorry, I've got Christine. Is it Kilger?
Kilger, yeah.
Hi, Christine. I love the texture that you've got on your house.
Thank you.
It's beautiful. And you've gone for the red door. I'm so glad. Using your artistic license. And have you used oil pastel on the roof, Christine?
No.
No. So have you just let that, wow, that looks really great.
A lot of white, yeah.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. Thanks for sharing. Right, back to gallery. I've got Jin B. Hello, Jin. Can I ask just that everybody else mute, just in case you've unmuted and then remuted again. Jin, that looks amazing. I love all your leakage. Is that the right term? Probably not.
I'm usually not one for letting things go out of the line, so this is very freeing for me.
You've done it so well, Jin.
Just to let the paint just flow into.
Yeah, it's gone all over the place. It's brilliant. But I think even if you're someone that likes structure, knowing that you can bring that structure back in as you go through the different stages can allow you to be free at the beginning stage. But I love all the colours that you've got. You've got some beautiful blends there, Jen. It's so nice. Sorry, you broke up. I think are you across the pond? We lost you. Just what you were saying just there.
Sorry.
Thank you so much for sharing. It's gorgeous. Lovely sketchbook page. Who have we got that wants to share? Just going through my little gallery. Wendy. Oh, look at that. That's a lovely experimental sketchbook page. Look at all of those lovely colour blends that you've got, Wendy.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Good. God, they look so lovely, and your house is really nice and messy. In a good way. That's a compliment, by the way. Lovely. Thanks so much for sharing. Just going.
Can I ask you a thing? Suzanne here from Denmark. What are you writing? You have a lot of writing, all of you, in your sketchbook.
Oh, yes. So I guess most of you writing about, you're making notes about what the colours you're mixing maybe, or little experiments or something that I'm saying. Maybe you're jotting it down because you don't want to forget. Is that the case? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Or if it's, you've got thumbs up. Yeah, so maybe that answers your question, that people are just making notes about what I'm saying and things that are working.
Okay.
So maybe that's something that you could try. It's certainly a nice thing to add to a sketchbook if you're looking at it like an exploratory workbook, you know, way of recording and just remembering those things. And I think the combination, I've got a bit of a thing about a combination of image and text because that's just my thing, but I love seeing scribbles in sketchbooks. It tells a bit more of the story, doesn't it? Oh, Nikki.
I think it's difficult when you are going between two languages, because I hear in English and I want to write in Danish, and that's impossible.
Oh my goodness.
My English spelling is hopeless, so it's difficult to write down in. So that messes up inside my brain.
Oh my goodness.
I might do that later, perhaps.
Yeah, so you could maybe before it goes, so in the have a night's sleep or something, and then look back over it and make a few notes.
Exactly.
Well, I admire anyone that can speak more than one language. So my hat goes off to you. Just that you can understand me is amazing. All of us British people are pretty much like that, aren't we? We all think everyone else is incredible that they can speak so many languages. Anyone else like to share? Oh, Margaret Matthews. Oh, Margaret, that's amazing. I've got you on, I think I've got you on mute at the moment, so you might have to unmute yourself.
Right. Yeah. So
gosh, some lovely blends.
Yeah, it was just very freeing, as the other person said. I'm usually quite precise, and I just went for it really and added layers. I like doing the layers. That was really good.
Yeah.
I'll try that again some more. Using water. I'm used to using watercolor.
Yeah.
So I like the idea of sort of layering it with other things, using the pencil's great. And yeah, I've really enjoyed it. So thanks very much.
I'm so glad, Margaret.
Yeah.
I think it is liberating to know that there are lots of rules out there if you're what I would call a proper watercolorist. But when you wear an illustration hat, actually all of them go out the window. So knowing what you can lay on top of each other means that there's no going wrong really, because you know that you can keep rectifying it.
Yes, that's great. Yeah, so thank you very much. Really enjoyed it.
I'm so glad.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to do a workshop mostly on my gouache Tipex technique, which is that when all my drawings go wrong, I just squirt white gouache all over it and mush it all up, and then kind of start again with a felt tip pen. So that's quite liberating, isn't it? So if in doubt and it all goes wrong, just squeeze a load of Tipexy white gouache.
I like that idea. How to cope with pictures that go wrong.
Yep.
A workshop on that would be great.
Okay, I will definitely do that. I don't know what to call it, big mistake or something like that. Mostly, I think I've shown most of you the images in my sketchbook that go wrong. I've always got bits of collage stuck on them. So wherever you see a bit of collage, that's something that's gone a bit wrong. Alison Burley, have you got a nice little bit of paper there for us? Oh yes, you have. Hi Alison. Oh, thank you. That's a tiny little sketchbook. Or are you just miles away? We can't hear you, Alison, just because you're muted. Oh no, that's all right. But we can. So I'm afraid I can't unmute you, but you can press your space bar.
Found it. Sorry about that.
Oh, well done. Oh,
yes, it was. I hadn't got a decent piece of watercolor paper, so it's a little sketchbook. Yeah.
Oh, it seemed to have worked really well on the paper that you've got. It looks brilliant.
Yeah, I was pleased with that. So thank you. And I also like being a bit quick. I'm
good.
I don't do slow drawings and detail. I tend to rush and then it looks a bit messy, but I'm quite enjoying it. So that's good. Thank you.
But again, this sort of layering system is great if you're precise, but it's also good if you're a bit slapdash, because I'm the same as you, Alison. But you can, it means you can get all that energy and slapdash in, but knowing the right stage to tighten it up right at the end, just get just a little bit tighter towards the end, and you pull all those slapdash brush marks right in. So it then looks like you were supposed to do it like that.
But I tend to go overdo it and then go too far. That's the only problem. And then it does look like a mess because you've got too. I don't know when to stop. That's the problem. This
is hard, isn't it? Yeah, no, I know. And I guess the more you do, the more you'll know that there's a stopping point.
Yeah. I tend to, if I'm doing sort of some sewing stuff, I tend to walk away and leave it and come back the next day. And then that's better. So I think I need to do the same thing with painting. Walk away when I think I've finished before I do anything else.
Yeah. So you look at it with fresh eyes. Yeah. Good plan. I think that's great advice, isn't it, for all of us, because you can be a bit blinded about what you're doing. Sometimes I do stuff in my sketchbook I think it's awful, and I look at it the next day and I think, oh, who did that? It's amazing. And then I think,
I haven't quite done that yet.
That's a good job to put it in the bin.
Thank you again. Anyway, thank you. I'm going to have to go now anyway. So
that's a pleasure. Thanks so much, Alison. Just checking in case anybody's plucked up the courage and I've not allowed you to show your work. Just wave it around in the screen a little bit. Kerry, is that you waving it, or are you just turning? She's going, no, don't show me. I've got Josephine. I'll quickly go to Josephine. Hi, Josephine. Oh, we've got you on mute.
Hi, sorry, it's Jo. But
hi, Jo.
Well, I didn't do a little house. I did a big house.
Oh my goodness, you did, didn't you? Yeah. So you've got gables and everything. Yeah. That's lovely, and some beautiful shading on the roof.
Fun to use your technique, anyhow.
Good.
Thank you.
Oh no, it's a pleasure. So I'm so glad, and it's really nice to see some different houses as well, and because the same technique can be applied to any sort of structural building. Whimsical houses and sorry, I just removed that spotlight. Castles, you know, little tiny dolls' houses that you can go mad. Now, I just want to do one final little check through that I haven't left anyone else out that would like to show. Oh, Caroline. Oh, hi, Caroline. Oh, Caroline Reynolds, is that right? Oh, hi, you're on mute, but you look like you're in a little cave, like a little art cave.
No, I'm just trying to shine a light on it. Can you see that?
Well, you can. We can just see it, but I can see all the texture that you've got there.
Very gloomy, but yeah.
Oh, I can see that. I can see the colour blends that you've got there, Caroline, are really lovely. You've got some really lovely glazing techniques there, especially in the foliage.
It yeah, it starts to get dark, and so I'm not sure about colours, but anyway.
Maybe it'll look different in the light.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing.
It was fun.
Thank you. Oh, I'm so glad. Teresa. Yeah. Oh, look at that. You've gone crazy. I love all the brush marks that you've used there, Teresa.
I'm staying at my sister's bungalow in Wales, and I just took a picture of it this afternoon. Thought I'd have a go at this. She might like a copy of it when I have another go at it.
Yeah, no, it's lovely. The glazing of all of the foliage that surrounds the white building looks fantastic. And in fact, I think that's a great technique, is leaving that, you know, obviously with a white building, you don't need to paint it at all, do you? But you
I was trying to put a bit of colour in it, because it's actually a very boring house. I think I've made it look a bit more quirky than it actually is. I like your idea of making the roof shape sort of, I don't know if you can, sort of, you can't see my finger, sort of, you don't do it straight necessarily. So I've made it look like old cottage.
Oh, it's lovely. Now, a top tip, if you've got a white structure like that, is definitely to bring those under eave shadows in.
All right.
So
I'll
when
do
it's
that now.
dry, just do a little line of the sort of
Yeah.
ultramarine blue or a pale grey, probably a blue because you've got a grey roof, just underneath
Yes.
all of those eaves, and it will
Great.
really it will change the white just a little bit. It stays white, but you just get that little bit of depth.
Thank you. And I've come away without my white gel pen, and I think that I might make some of the lines straighter with that, adding that. I've come away with some art materials and left a lot at home. So
sometimes that's good though, isn't it? When you've just got to kind of make do with what you've got.
Well, I had to do a quick Amazon Prime last night to get some paintbrushes that I'd forgotten to bring. Amazing. Thank you, lovely.
Brilliant. Well done. Well done you.
Bye.
Thanks, Teresa. Bye. Okay, just check in. Can we have a spotlight on Nikki's little dog, please? Oh, hello. You sat in the hot tub? No, she's...
We're on a holiday.
Oh, cool. Oh, my goodness.
Staying in a little caravan. So she's out, she's just keeping her eye on all the other dogs and that kind of thing, and making such a noise. So she's very interested in the houses though today, yeah.
So I'm hoping, Nikki, you're going to illustrate the caravan later.
Yes, maybe another rum, yeah.
Thank you very much. Have a happy holiday.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody, unless anybody would like to show any other work, I will sign off and let you go to bed. Just checking. I don't want to, if you've plucked up courage after seeing other people's work, I don't want to let you go just in case you want to share your work, but we're all dropping off now. So nice to see you all. See you again soon, and enjoy painting houses. Lots of love all. Bye.